Can't hear you, Vicky.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to Derbyshire Police and Crime Panel on today, Thursday, the 4th of February, 2021. If we can start the meeting, I would like to start with apologies for absence, please. Ivan, have you got any apologies?
Just from Councillor Carol Hart, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivan. We've noted that. Item 2 on the agenda is declaration of interest. Have we got anybody wanting to declare anything at this point? No. Okay. Moving on then to confirm, item 3 is to confirm the minutes of the meeting of the Derbyshire Police and Crime Panel held on the 19th of November last year. If we go through, if there are any clarifications, any accuracies or matters arising, if I start with page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, and page 8. Can we accept those as an accurate record?
Move, Chair.
Thank you.
Happy with that, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on then to item 4, the main item for the agenda this morning. So this is to consider the report from the Police and Crime Commissioner for Derbyshire on the proposed precept for 2021-22. Before I invite Hardiel to say, a brief overview of your report, Hardiel, could I just offer our thanks to our new Chief Constable, Rachel Swan, for her very, very helpful letter of introduction, which was put forward as part of the pack. I think that, thank you, Rachel, that's been really helpful for us in terms of understanding the operational issues that you've got this year.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Okay, so Hardiel, if you'd like to lead us through your report then, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The report is tabled. What I would like to do is that on this occasion, rather than going through the report line by line, I would like to invite the Chief Constable to expand on her letter, which I think you've welcomed, and also to then have a presentation, a short presentation from the Finance Director for my office, and then the finance lead for the Chief Constable. And after that, I will invite comments and questions after that. So, Chair, if you are happy with that, I would like to ask the Chief Constable to just make the operational professional case for what she thinks is required for Derbyshire Constabulary to protect and fight crime in Derbyshire.
Thank you, Hardiel. Yes, that's great.
Morning, everyone. Thank you. John's just sharing the presentation. It's actually really nice to speak to you all again. It's been 6 months since I last saw you all, and it's actually nice to be here and not having confirmation hearing to get the job. It's nice to be here actually doing the job of Chief Constable, and I really hope that you've all been keeping safe within this time. John, the presentation is visible.
It probably needs enlarging a bit, unless it's going to get bigger later, Rachel.
I'm going to ask John, who's sharing it for me. It's not full screen, John, it's just quite small. I'll tell you what we'll do. I'll start talking whilst we just sort that out. It's probably the easiest thing for me to do. So clearly, it's been an extremely unusual and traumatic year for many, and the fallout from the current emergency situation has dominated the year, and I will discuss that in some detail later on. Within the constabulary, we have a proven track record in delivering against the priorities that have been set out in the policing and crime plan, and we remain one of the lowest spending forces per head of population in the country. And this is partly due to savings that have been secured in a number of ways that include working nationally, regionally and locally with our partners. And I know that for many people at this time, they are really struggling at the moment, but my priority as your Chief Constable must be the continued delivery of an efficient and high quality policing service for the communities of Derbyshire, and one that they can trust. We have been modelling a range of financial scenarios over the last few months to ensure resilience going ahead at this time. And obviously, Andrew and Simon will talk to you in more depth later on around that. But I'd first like to really start by providing you with an update on recruitment, which has been as a result of this year's precept increase of £10, which obviously was the maximum permitted at the time, which you unanimously supported at this panel last year. So we'll just talk about the recruitment for a second then. The Policing Uplift programme has obviously added to this, and it enabled the recruitment of additional 39 police officers this year, in addition to the 50 police officers that we recruited early through this programme last year. So overall, through Uplift, there's 89 that have come in, and obviously the force was quite ahead of itself and knew the money was coming in, so brought those people in as early as possible, in faith that the money would come through to that, which it has. In addition to this, we've also recruited 79 police officers and 52 PCSOs from our grant and last year's precept increase. All of this is really welcome. And in addition to this, we've continued to invest in our vital estate and the technology modernisation programmes that support the front line. Whilst those additional 283 officers, which we will have through the Uplift programme by 2023, will be well received by you and the communities of Derbyshire, to date we've actually only grown by 89, but we're all in line in terms of the year's projections that we should have. And certainly I can reassure you that Derbyshire has no problem attracting people to the force. We actually have huge amounts of people who want to join, and that's far more than actually places that we ever would have, which is a good position to be in as a chief. And I think it really reflects what people think about the police force. But I need to highlight that whilst additional police officers are always welcome, the Uplift does not come without certain constraints which are not immediately apparent. So if I just think about the funding for the Uplift, we find ourselves, we've got to look at other sort of costs that are associated with them. But also we find ourselves preparing and planning for future costs and trying to work out. So those officers come into the organisation and they're paid for in terms of coming in, but actually they stay with us for a long period of time. So we have to model, many years ahead without certainty of any sustainable funding. And I think none of us would say that we don't think that the impact of COVID on the economy will actually be felt within public services, because I honestly believe that it will. But having said all of this, even with the ring fencing, and it restricts some of the flexibility that I have in terms of police staff and police officers, we still try to prioritise, and we still manage to prioritise the resources and make sure that the day-to-day business of fighting crime, proactively bringing offenders to justice and protecting the most vulnerable from harm and delivering a policing service that all our communities can trust absolutely does go on. So this year, we have identified 9 key strategic areas of strategic risk, and these are what I call the operational areas of strategic risk. So whilst there are priorities I would like to do as the chief, and there's the police and crime plan, clearly we look at what operational threats sit within that. What are the biggest threats that are affecting our communities? And we do all this as well as recognising that vulnerability is a cross-cutting theme for all of these. And those areas are child abuse and exploitation, residential burglary, rape and serious sexual offences, domestic abuse, modern slavery and human trafficking, county lines, killed and seriously injured on our roads, fraud and cyber-dependent crime, and organised crime. And as I said, with vulnerability sort of cross-cutting across all of these. And these areas require significant ongoing investment, ongoing review, and a real approach of continuous improvement to ensure that the risk associated with them continues to be managed. You can't fail to notice that many of these crimes cannot actually be addressed simply by visible policing. They can't be patrolled out. A lot of these things take place in a hidden environment or in the home. And so actually it's not simply a case of putting more visible presence for these. They require investment in specialist and dedicated resources to tackle some of the complex problems that they face for us. The Uplift programme will absolutely assist in addressing these, because this allows me to put police officers in those specialist areas of business, and I can realign that without with little tangible impact on the front line, which is so important to people feeling confident in policing. But as I say, the future financial isn't certain for us, and as our complexities of policing grow, and indeed as we look at some financial pressures coming in over the next couple of years, we do need to continue to look to review our model and look at the services we provide moving forward. However, the argument I present today in terms of the precept is allowing us to continue to develop in terms of where we are in addressing those for this next financial year, and give us a solid basis the years to come. So the new strategic risk areas were identified last year now, 2020, and as such they were done, to such an extent that we did at the start of the year, as you would expect in normal planning, where the global coronavirus pandemic, we didn't know that it would have such an impact on policing and the broader public sector. And life in Derbyshire and worldwide has simply been turned upside down since the beginning of last year, with the frontline functions of the force being called upon to act in the capacity of enforcing public health restrictions, something that I never thought we would do. I sometime back in my career, when I remember foot and mouth coming in, and the police had a little role in that, but it was nothing like it is now in terms of enforcing the public health restrictions for COVID. And so, tackling these priority areas would be a challenge in normal times, but I can, absolutely confidently say these are not normal times, and therefore the challenge to us is simply amplified. We've really had to reinvent how we work, and with an increased number of frontline colleagues using existing and new technologies to work remotely from home and ensure that there is business as usual to keep our communities safe. And whilst an agile and reconfigured organisation may initially sound positive, it hasn't been possible without significant cost pressures. Literally in March, we said, right, all of those who are not required in work in a frontline capacity, we need you to go home. And we needed them to go home and be able to work so that those functions that support the rest of the force could carry on. And so, these do bring cost pressures. And, if I just take the simple fact of giving people suitable laptops to do that, laptops have an end of life, there's a cost up front, and then, they only last for a certain period of time. So it's not like a one-off cost. It's sort of every 3-4 years, they need reinvestment and across all of the organisation. So in order to address these priority areas and those that have not, and I should point out, those that have not been explicitly identified as a priority, because these are still important nonetheless, and we need to do things about them. It's just that where they are the priority areas, they dominate our operational tasking. We have continued to invest in our specialist, but as I said earlier, less visible policing functions, the core visible policing presence in our communities, and the virtual frontline in the control room, or CMARC, and our continual improvement to improve, our vital estate and provide people with a decent working place. In terms of my own priorities, I launched earlier this year, with this absolute support of the PCC, Operation Derbyshire. And this is an ongoing policing operation which will run for several months, and it seeks to ensure that regardless of which community people live or work in, or indeed visit, their priorities, which may not be those operational priorities, those big strategic operational ones I've talked about, they are seen and felt to be taken as extremely seriously by us and to be visibly addressed. So it's the things that I'm talking about, which in fact, will affect people's quality of life. So antisocial behaviour issues that might be in their local communities, speeding issues that might be in their local communities. So Operation Derbyshire concentrates on 4 key themes that our communities tell me are important to them, and also tell the PCC that they are important to them. And those are reassuring our rural communities and supporting victims, addressing antisocial behaviour and community crime, tackling speeding, and ensuring police visibility, and really making sure that we do everything we can in the social media sphere as well, because I know, people pay a great deal of attention to it, and we do such good work. And sometimes I think we miss a trick by, when we've done something, not telling people that we've done something about it, because otherwise they think we're not listening and that we don't care. And it's quite the reverse. So there's a real effort to make sure that it's not social media alone, but actually that we're making sure that we're telling people we have listened and this is what we have done to tackle your local problem. And as part of Operation Derbyshire, I'm committed to invest in reassuring our rural communities and supporting victims, so investment in new technology that will help support the most vulnerable. Addressing that antisocial behaviour, so by and also community crime, so increasing the number of people that work in the control room to improve our non-emergency call handling times. For many, many people, the only contact they have with policing is through the control room, and there is a huge amount of demand in there. And I often think of it as our shop window, really, and certainly for non-emergency, we've not always been providing the level of service that I would want. And so it needs in there some investment in terms of staffing and also some investment within technology to improve not just the call handling times, but also the service that people receive when they go through, particularly to the non-emergency, so that they know we do value what they're bringing to us, and actually they feel that they've had the right service and the service that they deserve. But I also want to develop our drone capability to enable all-weather flying, and certainly to do some underwater search capabilities, which save an awful lot of time and are a much more effective way of dealing with some, bespoke problems, and to introduce some rapid deployment cameras that can be used to tackle antisocial behaviour. In terms of speeding, I want to continue to invest in speed detection technology and increase the number of flexibly deployed ANPR cameras that we have, so that we can understand our road networks and make a safer road network, but also tackle criminality on it. And in terms of ensuring police visibility, additional CCTV cameras that can be flexibly deployed, an increase in the number of neighbourhood investigation officers. These really support the neighbourhood teams to keep them out and about in the communities and do some of the work that can be done without warranted powers, but can enable the PCSOs and the PCs to go and do other aspects of policing that the community want them to do, but free their time to do so, and provide real bespoke investigations and investigation skills for some community problems. And I also want to introduce a fleet of e-bikes, which we've been piloting quite recently, and I think everybody understands the geography. It's not just within the within the county; it's within the city as well. They provide a really good way for our officers and staff to get out and about and be seen within their communities and travel, much greater ground that they could have done, but in a real cost-effective and green way. I just want to talk about estates, because our communities do draw considerable reassurance from seeing police stations, and that I feel is always part of a visible presence for them. And estate improvements and seeing that we are established in locations and aim to be in the future, I think will have a real knock-on effect to increase confidence within the constabulary. The photograph on the slide shows the work ongoing at Ascot Lane, which is replacing the very ageing police station at Cotton Lane with a modern joint facility with fire that's fit for purpose and fit for policing now and in the future. But there is an awful lot of estate that is a real concern for us after years of decline and a lack of proper maintenance to reduce costs. So then it becomes very, very, very expensive to maintain. And without immediate and urgent investment, maintenance costs will continue to increase and the conditions will continue to deteriorate. So we are planning for significant estates improvement in the first instance in the northeast and the northwest of the county, where it is most ageing. And I think demonstrating our presence in terms of the assets the estates brings us in those communities will really bring some confidence to them, and particularly where geography can sometimes be seen as an issue. Whilst discussions are in advanced stages in relation to land acquisitions for the northeast and the northwest, the majority of the associated debt and capital charges don't impact on the budget to 23-24, but estate needs to be maintained in order to take us there. So moving on to the next slide in terms of the preset discussion. There are significant financial challenges facing us all in the coming months and years, but the key question when determining the level of the preset must be, does it allow for a manageable and sustainable budget in the forthcoming year that delivers continuing investment against our priorities whilst protecting the constabulary for the future? And the options you'll hear today, I think, for an increase in terms of £5, £10, 5% and £15. None of those, and I need to be clear, none of those will allow us to say we're absolutely secure for continued investments in the forthcoming years in those ones ahead of it. But however, the £15 precept discussion will allow us to remain some stability and to continue to invest in the areas that I've talked about for this next forthcoming year. I'd also like to make a point with this. Not all of the investment comes simply from growth and asking for precept. We have a programme of work in the constabulary called Cost of Policing, which we've been running for some time, which is to do with identifying efficiencies and savings. And so some of the work that we do to tackle the operational priorities and those other priorities I've spoken about, our ability to do that comes from also realigning resource and money through that piece of work, which is ongoing. I don't expect to simply come every year and ask for growth without having looked and continuing to look to see where I can gain efficiencies and savings throughout the year and to reinvest those. So I really want to reassure you that that's an ongoing piece of work. And as someone with a responsibility for a large amount of public funds, it's incumbent to me to make sure that I have a continuing programme of work that identifies efficiencies, and those are either reinvested or saved where it is most appropriate. So I'd just like to reassure you with that. So in modelling all of the precept options, anything other than £15, as I said, will actually yield a gap. And that gap will mean that I won't be able to build on the investments that we've made. I won't be able to invest in those areas of business I've just spoken to you about. And I will have to make some choices in terms of where we will make the savings and efficiencies, which obviously does change the level of service that we give to our community and brings greater risk and threat to some of those priority areas I've talked about. The £15 on the precept amount would allow for the immediate investment in those areas discussed, improve the visibility and responsiveness of policing for all of Derbyshire's many and varied communities. And I'm sure I said this to you 6 months ago, I'm really keen to provide a service that is responsive to those community needs and that the community feels that we are responsive to them and we listen to them. And it provides a sound foundation to help prepare for the challenges that do lay ahead of us all. And I've carefully considered this, and I'm confident that the areas discussed in this presentation for immediate and urgent investment would enable resilience for now and a good foundation for the future. So in conclusion, regardless of your decision today, I must be realistic and state that further savings may need to be made in the coming years. I think we all understand that. I obviously will try to do everything I can in the forthcoming years to not affect people and to take all of those costs that are not non-people costs out of the organisation first. But, you know, in a few years' time, it may well be that we need to reduce police officer numbers and police staff. However, this year, with the £15, we do not need to do that. I would also like to reassure you, as I've said, the cost of policing programme to identify savings will carry on and will continue to carry on. An increase of £15, I know, will be difficult for many, and it's not something I ask for lightly. Anything other than a precept of £15 won't sustain the investments made so far or deliver those targeted plans that I would seek to do. Limited increases in our core grant, combined with our already depleted reserves, places the constabulary in a precarious situation which the communities of Derbyshire are regrettably being asked to address. But as I say, I would like to reassure you all that I am ever vigilant of the need to pursue every opportunity for efficiencies that do not impact on our delivery, on our ability to deliver policing within Derbyshire, and I would never seek to ask for more funding than is absolutely necessary for this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Would you be happy to take some questions from the panel at this point, or would you prefer to wait to the end?
I'm happy if the PCC is happy. I'm absolutely happy to do so.
Chair, could I request to get the full picture, if the finance directors do their financial presentation, which hopefully won't be that long, and then that might be the right time to ask questions of the Chief Constable.
No problem.
We'll save them. Yeah, thank you. Could I invite Andrew and Simon to do their presentation, please, on the financial briefing?
Okay, good morning, everybody. Can I just check that everybody can see the presentation on screen?
Yes, I can see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Right, well, good morning. Those of you that were here last year will remember that Simon and I generally do a bit of a double act in terms of giving you a little bit of a briefing, some of the headlines really from the budget report, and just some of the key messages that we feel as finance professionals you need to be aware of when you consider the Commissioner's request. So just to give you a bit of a heads up around the settlements, it was marginally better than we were expecting, but it's really important to stress that it does assume that full precept flexibility is taken by PCCs. So the headline numbers that you will have seen in the media certainly are inherently assuming that we take the full £15 precept. So just to keep that in your mind. There was an increase of 6.3% in the police grant from government. It's worth noting, though, that that does include the police officer uplift. So that increase looks quite significant, but it is actually rolling in the commitment to fund the additional police officers from previous years. The pensions grant has been held at flat cash, and the capital grant has also been held at flat cash. There is an amount that's been set aside by government of 1.4 million, which will be paid on a stage payments basis, a little bit like payment by results, which essentially means as we recruit those additional 83 officers during 21-22, we will put a claim into government and they will release the funding on that basis. It's important to note that of the police officer uplift, which members will recall, we'll see 283 additional police officers into Derbyshire over the life of the uplift programme. Only the 83 that we've been given the funding for next year is committed and guaranteed. So beyond next year, we're still having to wait until we get that assurance from government. That is because it's a one-year settlement. And so, as I'm sure you'll be hearing locally from your own finance officers, if you've had a one-year settlement, that that does bring a certain amount of uncertainty. So Simon and I have to plan on that basis. And then the final point on that slide, about the £15, and I think Rachel's really described that far better than I can, which is that the reality is without the £15, we have to make some very difficult decisions. So I just wanted to stress that point. Over to Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Morning, morning members. As Andrew said, you probably heard me talk in the last couple of years around the force's financial position. And just to add a bit more detail behind what Andrew and Rachel have covered so far, we have been doing lots of modelling. I'm sure it's the same within your local authorities as well about what the impact will be. And it is difficult, but at the moment we are looking at deficits in 2022-23 onwards, really as a result of some of those restrictions around potential precept, but also going forward, but also looking at some of the commitments that we've got, particularly as you've heard around the officer uplift and the numbers of officers that we have to recruit and the infrastructure behind them. Now, we've done a reasonable worst case scenario, which is a phrase that's been used a lot this year, which looks at that potentially rising up to £10 million deficit by the end of 24-25 with pension pressures and other pressures around national programmes around replacing the emergency services network, which is the communications network that the police operate under. Now, obviously, the longer it goes on, the more uncertain that is, but it does show that there is still quite a significant challenge there in the medium to longer term, which again was covered by the Chief Constable in her presentation. Just to reinforce the point, again, 21-22, if we did look at the settlement and taking the full £15, that does allow us to protect that investment and build on that investment that you've supported as a panel over the last 2 to 3 years. It makes sure that we continue to deliver against those priorities. But we do know that we're going to have to make savings. We're going to have to look at how we fund that gap that I referred to earlier. And the cost of policing programme that was referred to earlier is something that we're continuing to push on a regular basis. It forms a part of our operational risk assessment, and we feed that into our budgeting decisions throughout the year, not just at budget setting time. In terms of the reserves position, it is challenging, again, no different really to your respective local authorities. And our reserves have fallen by more than the national average over the last 4 to 5 years. Again, it's planned investment in some of the infrastructure that we've seen, the ICT being a big example of that. And again, just to perhaps give a bit of context on the reserves, we've got £5.5 million in our general fund balances. Now, in a reasonable worst case scenario, if we had pay all to the pressures to meet, they could soon be exhausted. So they are fairly low in the context of some of the other balances you'll see, certainly in policing, but also in local authorities as well. The single year budget settlement makes it very difficult. Again, no different to local authorities, and we catch up with our local authority colleagues on a regular basis to look at the impacts of this. But we are a bit more reliant on grant than other forces. That's changed a bit over the years. We used to be predominantly 70% funded from grant and 30% from precept. That's shifted a bit to 60-40. So that does give us a bit more flexibility. Obviously, that comes with an expectation on the taxpayer, which we're acutely aware of. We do have significant cost pressures. That's over 30 million in 21-22, and within that 13 million, over 9 million of that is what we call unavoidable, really. It's things that we have to pay around maintenance. It's things that we have to meet around the uplift, as you've heard earlier, of officers, and also some of those inflation and some limited pay increases. So they're things that actually, once we take that 9 million out of that 30 million pressures, there isn't a great deal in the context of our significant, quite large budget to play with, really. And the other thing I suppose, again, worth highlighting, and it's been discussed earlier on, is we still have 10% less officers than we did back in 2010. We had some information through only in the last week, which showed the latest position relative to other forces. So we're not quite in a position that some other forces find themselves in, where maybe some of that has been recovered over the last few years. So just to summarise this before I hand back to Andrew, it is a reasonable settlement, but obviously it does rely on that £15 precept increase. But we do have those challenges in the medium term, and obviously we'll keep modelling that, keep making sure we update our financial strategy to take account of that. The £15 is included within the headline announcements, as Andrew highlighted at the start. And you'll have heard quite a bit from Rachel there around the North East and North West hub projects. We have built the borrowing into the budget to fund those, but it does depend on that £15 preset this year to help sustain that and meet that borrowing commitment over the future. And obviously we're very mindful of the need to address those issues around the estate. We have got a significant sort of backlog maintenance issue in some areas, which this is essential to ensure we can address that. We have said, and a number of scenarios show that anything less than £15 would mean we're having to make some tough decisions about what we do and don't fund, and indeed, revisit some of those priorities, particularly maybe some of the community priorities that have been covered earlier in the presentation. Still uncertainty that we've got to live with, and again, not any different to anybody else in that respect. But please reassure you that we continue to look at how we can make the best use of the funds we've got. Make sure we prioritise where those officers from the uplift are going as well. And just the final one, you wouldn't perhaps expect me not to mention it, but in terms of COVID, you've heard about some of the pressures around, particularly some of the agile working and the approaches we've had to adopt. We haven't had any funding for that from government yet. We've had funding for the immediate costs around PPE. We've had some funding to cover us through income loss, which again is not insignificant. But at the moment, it's unlikely we're going to get any funding for some of that infrastructure, those infrastructure costs, particularly IS, over the future. We continue to work closely with our local authority colleagues, catching up every week on where we are with the council tax receipts. And again, that's another challenge that we know we're going to have to address and work closely with our colleagues on to make sure we cover those losses through council tax receipts, but we have got some provision in reserves to cover that in the short term. But again, no guarantees beyond that. So if I perhaps just hand back to Andrew to cover the final bits of the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Simon. So then just a final slide around the public consultation. We're obviously running that consultation during what has been an unprecedented year for everybody, and Derbyshire residents and people that visit Derbyshire are obviously included in that. That said, we've been really pleased to see that the increase in the number of people responding to the survey based on last year. So, our thanks go out to everybody for doing that. Of those people that responded, and just bearing in mind this year that the consultation had to be done virtually, so there were 2 virtual events, but predominantly it's about people that have accessed the survey electronically. 67.6% were in favour of £15 or more, so it's worth noting that a good proportion of people actually said that they would go above £15 if asked. All local authority areas were well represented in the consultation, so we have got some demographic data to show that, and I was really pleased to see that we got a good spread across the county. And this final point there, I mean, people won't have missed some of the discussion that's gone on through social media channels, and I just wanted to stress that the Commissioner and ourselves are acutely aware that this is not always going to be a popular thing to consider when tax increases are on the table. But we have got a very difficult balance to strike between protecting the service and reinforcing the priorities that you've heard Rachel talk about, but also being responsive to what the communities are telling us that they want from policing as well. So it is a very difficult decision, and hence the Commissioner's had quite a lot to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Constable and the two finance directors. Chair, if I can sort of say just some summing up words, and then I'm happy to invite questions from yourself and the panel. It's a very difficult decision to make sure that I balance the needs of policing, the needs of the financial probity, but most importantly, the messages and the needs and the ask of the people of Derbyshire. The people of Derbyshire have consistently, since I got elected, have said to me when I have been doing a tour of Derbyshire, the urban, suburban, rural tour, and visiting every town, village and neighbourhood, that they want the police to deal with the risk and threats that the Chief Constable just shared with us, but also they want reassurance. And the reassurance they wanted was on tackling speeding, antisocial behaviour, and making sure that there's reassurance through visible neighbourhood policing. I have listened to that. I have had conversation with the Chief Constable with that, and the Chief Constable has reflected that in her recommendation, her professional recommendation of what is the best way forward for the Derbyshire Constabulary to serve the people of Derbyshire, to fight crime and protect vulnerable communities. The finance directors have given you a good detailed information, which is in the report that I've submitted, in terms of what their view is and what would be best going forward. You have heard that I have consulted the public of Derbyshire as well as I could do in this COVID-19 lockdown. And I'm pleased to say, despite my concern and difficulty in having the onus put on me to raise council tax precept, the people of Derbyshire, in a significant majority, supported funding policing at £15 or more additional council tax precept. Now, I would not like to be in this position because the announcement from government have consistently said they have funded policing. And that statement and the public statements are reliant and conditional on the maximum £15 flexibility being taken up. So on that basis, and understanding the difficult situation many people find themselves in, and many have lost their jobs due to COVID-19, but I'm still heartened that the people of Derbyshire for policing are still supportive of more police, more visibility, and tackling the issues they want to do. What the Chief Constable and the finance officers have given you is the way forward to do that on the recommendation of a £15 council tax precept increase as recommended by the government. I hope that's been helpful. You've got the full document paper presenting the precept budget and recommendations. I'm happy, Chair, for you to ask questions yourself or comment, and panel members.
Many thanks, Hardiel, and also many thanks again to Rachel, our Chief Constable, and to your Chief Finance Officers. I can see that a massive amount of work has gone into this preparation, not only of the work you've done in the background to actually put a precept together, but also a lot of thought's been given to the way in which you present the information to us to make that an understandable presentation to us. So we do appreciate that. I'm not going to ask any questions at this point because I can see that I've got a great long list of panel members who want to ask questions, so I'll allow them to do that. So starting with Councillor Jed Potter, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rachel, both for your report and your presentation. It was interesting and comprehensive. First one is a comment, really. I know you said the lowest spending force per head of population in the country. I just get a bit nervous with that because from my police career, I know if you're a low spending but good achieving force, the mandarins at the Home Office will expect you to continue. I remember talking to a former football manager who said his worst possible mistake in his career was achieving success by low spending, because then the directors expected it and eventually he had to go. So that's my first nervousness around that. Secondly, I think whilst we quote that police officer numbers are not what was in 2010, I think we ought to note and consider and realise a lot of the roles and responsibilities within the community have been taken on by local authorities with public protection officers, CEOs and other departments. I mean, as a local councillor, I often get residents contacting me and said, I phoned this complaint to the police and they say they don't deal with it anymore. It's a council thing. So I think we ought to recognise that a lot of the roles and responsibilities that the police had within the community in 2010 are no longer there. They've been taken on by authorities. I welcome your continual comment about efficiency and savings. I think that's always good. I think if we've got to go back to the public and justify the precept, it's always nice to know that the head of the organisation is pursuing efficiencies and savings. And the last thing, as a ex-CID officer, I'm just interested in the neighbourhood investigating officers that you're increasing from 10 to 21. It's always good to have people who can interact and investigate with the community and be within the community. I just would like to know, are these NIOs warranted or non-warranted? That's it. Thank you.
Sure. I'll take the last one first. They're not warranted. They, in essence, they sort of successfully bridged the gap between safer neighbourhood teams, PCSOs and police constables, where, you know, our PCSOs in particular were utilised for visible and they're always intended to be utilised for visibility and community engagement, as well as the enforcement of some low-level antisocial behaviour. But inevitably, PCSOs have found themselves assisting their police constable colleagues with the investigation of low-level crimes. So the NIOs were introduced. They're not warranted, but they are trained investigators to take the investigation away from PCSOs, to enable the PCSOs to be out and about and that level of problem solving, but support the PCSOs and the local neighbourhood teams in terms of the investigation of some of the stuff that you would really expect to be dealt with by a safer neighbourhood team that really affects people's quality of life, and, you know, it is within that basket of crime and incidents that are there. At the moment we have 11, so you know, we're not looking for large numbers of increase, but if we were to secure the £15 precept, they would increase their numbers to a total of 21, and I'd also want to use them to support the PCSOs and the neighbourhood teams in some of the safeguarding work that they have in terms of tackling vulnerability at that lowest level. I do note your concerns about lowest level of spending, and actually, if you're doing that well without, you know, with that little money, can you do better? You know, yeah, there's always that danger. I note that completely, and yeah, I do. Simon will know this, and Kate, my new deputy. Obviously, I was a deputy for some years, and so I was very focused on efficiencies and savings and providing value for money. And that doesn't change with me being chief. So I do end up, I would like to say it's not interfering, but I do end up taking a big interest in terms of making sure that we provide value for money. And you're right, you can't compare like for like in terms of 2010. It's a completely different landscape to what it was then. And, you know, if you think about certainly the growth in vulnerability and dealing with vulnerability and the different things that that other partners deal with as well. It isn't like for like, but I think the point that Simon made around comparing the numbers to 2010 is other forces nationally have got to the number they had in 2010 and we haven't. So I think that's where the comparison was being drawn, rather than, suggesting it's policing as it was then, because it really wasn't. Hopefully that answers your questions.
Thanks,
Jed,
Rachel.
Can I just come back on one point you made, which is, I think, a really important point you made about how local authorities had to take on some roles in time, public protection officers, civil enforcement officers, and how that will have reduced demand for policing. I can tell you that it hasn't. The example you gave about sometimes when people phone the police and they say, well, we don't do that, it's a similar thing the other way around as well. I've got lots of examples where people defer things to the police when they say we can't do them, when local authorities or other public services are contacted. So demand actually has gone up, and it happened in your time as well, I'm sure, Jed, but now it's still there that 70 to 80% of what is calls for service to the police is welfare, it's mental health related, it's about the sort of enforcement issues that are for local authorities and other public services to do. And that is a constant challenge on how we can actually work together in partnership to tackle some of those things, and that's where the quality of life thing comes in. When I go up and down the county, people tell me, oh, the police should be sorting these things out, when quite clearly it is other civil enforcement powers that should be doing that, whether it's fly tipping or unless there's industrial crime waste. So there's a balance between the two, but you're quite right to raise that issue about how different responses from different organizations can move demand one way or the other. My experience is, and the Chief Constable may be able to confirm or not that, is that demand on policing has continued to increase, and particularly on areas where potentially it's not actually policing matter, it's more an issue for other services. And we're a 24/7 service, unlike many others. I don't know if the Chief Constable might want to add anything to that.
Sure. Demand has increased and demand has changed. The well-being, welfare aspect that we have for people who find themselves in crisis or have complex lives that mean that they need us to come, when they hit those crisis points, has completely changed in the last 10 years and is an ever increasing area of business for us. It does dominate our demand. I even, if I just look at the executive log for the last few days, we've had a number of people each day that are high risk missing people who find themselves in crisis, and we spend a huge amount of time, quite rightly, because they're at risk of losing their lives, to find them in very difficult circumstances. So the Commissioner's right, the demand has changed and it's much more complex, and it is much more around welfare and well-being, which does actually require partnership response. We are and always will be the organisation of last resort in those cases, and not necessarily the best people to intervene and to help people at an earlier stage. But it does mean that it is a big chunk of our demand.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Moving on, Councillor Mick Bagshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rachel and Idle and your officers for a good presentation. I'm afraid what I'm going to ask, the panel will be banging the heads together because they know what I'm like with specials. But first of all, unless I heard you wrong, Rachel, did you say Operation Derbyshire is to run for the next few months? If that's the case, how long will it run for? Second question is, specials are a very, very valuable resource to Derbyshire. So in the report, I've not seen anything where you've got investment to recruit specials. What plans have you got for their more involvement into safer neighbourhood teams, like being assigned to a safer neighbourhood team to help the visibility aspect. And lastly, going on what Jed has picked up on about joint working togethers, Idle knows my view on this, and I've been trying for months and months and months to try and get joint surgeries, either walkabout surgeries or a market stall, something like that, to show that we can work as councillors together with the Safer Neighbourhood team, because as Jed has picked up, you go out and about and all you get is somebody will go to a police officer or a PCSO and they'll say, well, that's not to do with us, it's with council, and vice versa. And I think that by working together will help sustain and get people's trust back into both authorities. Thank you.
Let me just answer those. Sorry, I'm muting myself. Thanks, Mick. So talk to you first about specials. The first question was on Derbyshire. So what I've said is I'm going to review it after 6 months to look at its success and to look at if it needs to continue or to look if it needs to evolve. So it will be at least till midway through the year. And at that point, it will probably morph into something else. I mean, all of the things I talk about, I would like to think become business as usual rather than needing a specific operation. Because if we're doing what I'd like, which is being responsive and telling the communities what we're doing and tackling their problems, I would like to think that could become business as usual. And that's where I'd want to review it, because the ethos behind it is something that I fundamentally believe in. The recruitment of specials, we are currently recruiting new cohorts of specials, actually. Special constabulary have been absolutely brilliant with COVID, and we have been very, very fortunate that we have some really dedicated people who, particularly within the first lockdown, when people weren't working, they dedicated hours and hours and hours of time for constabulary, which is fully appreciated, and we really couldn't do without. So we are going through currently recruiting more specials to make sure that we maintain our numbers, because, as you know, lots of specials then choose to join the regulars, and they remain a big part of our plans. And certainly ACC Michelle Shooter leads our citizen policing programme, of which specials are one bit and volunteers are another. And that is a key area of work for her within her portfolio around local policing. And then the final bit about joint surgeries. Yeah, that's really interesting, because some of the things that we're working to do, and COVID has prevented this, is where I see when I go around the county really good pockets of where there is join up, because you're right, people come and you go and speak to one of the neighbourhood teams and they say, oh no, that's not us, that's a local council, that's someone else. It's actually much better if you can do those things locations together, so you've got a one-stop shop, so that I can say, well, I can't help, but this person can. So those people can get that joined up approach from us. I've asked Michelle is leading a piece of work called Professionalising Neighbourhood Policing, which is very much looking to do things like that, which is looking at the very best of how neighbourhood teams can work and making sure that we try to deliver that across the whole of the force. So when we're post-COVID, that's certainly something that would be really supportive of in terms of how we better join up with others to tackle local issues.
Lovely.
Chief Constable. Mick, I think just to say thank you for your comments, and thank you for the meeting we had recently, and to see how we can take forward the ideas you've just shared with the Chief Constable, including joint surgeries, but really about that walkabouts, which are partnership joined up together. And I look forward to taking that forward. We have done that, as I shared with you, in a number of parts of the county already. We've done that in Wirksworth, Matlock. I'm doing it in the High Peak with the rural communities. We've done it in Chesterfield and Derby City, and we can always continue to learn and use the skills and the enthusiasm from local community leaders like yourself with local police officers working together for the benefit of the people of Derbyshire. So thank you for what you've been doing.
Well, thanks, pair of you for answering the questions. Thank you.
Okay, I think Councillor Clive Mosby next.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. Thanks for that. And thanks, Rachel, for your presentation. Straight to the point, understood it, know the problems, open and transparent, and shows where we've got to be going at the end of the day. So I welcome that. And obviously, it'd be a bit remiss of me not to thank Andrew and Simon for their short presentations. They're good. Because I'm in charge of finance up in Bolsover, I can understand the problems they've got, and certainly single year settlements, although we may get a longer one next year, are not good for planning any medium term financial planning or anything. So it is plaiting fog, as I always say, at this present time. So my sympathies go out to them. Enough of me ranting. What I want to do at the end of the day is, I welcome the emphasis that I've seen on these slides. I think it was slide priority 3 and 4 within it all, on such things as speeding, because this is a local neighbourhood community problem that we all get as members at Ende and Ardle, and Kevin and others know my views on that within it all. I do welcome the neighbourhood investigating officers down there, because if we can get that down to a level, we can show again that we're doing something in local neighbourhoods and we're listening to people's worries and concerns. And certainly, I had an instance to pass some stuff through a couple of weeks ago, and I have to say the response was, was marvellous at the end of the day. There are issues going off in other parts, but another neighbourhood team came in and tried to help me out now. So that's wonderful. The police call centre 101, I think it's been abysmal in sometimes, I'll be quite frank with you. It's the first port of call, contact with police, and you need to get through there, you need to get it on record, and it needs to be logged properly, because then there's a bit of a relationship builds up between the person reporting and the police at the end of the day, because do that wrong and you've got a bit of a battle to go on. So that's good in there as well. And I'm also really interested in the antisocial behaviour stuff that you're doing. It again, I'm talking a lot of neighbourhood stuff here, because that is what is the issues. So anything on ASB has got to be an improvement in things. So thanks for that. I'll get to my question now. And Jed and myself always have this sort of battle as who can talk the longest on questions or whatever. So I'm out to beat him if I can today. Really, it's about ASB, because it is an issue. It is a major issue to myself as a local member and a community leader, and to the people that are representing it all. So it's really linked into COVID-19 and ASB. So really, in the last 12 months, because we've been locked down for 12 months, come March now, we had various lockdowns at all. Has COVID-19 played a part in causing any increase in reports, could you sort of give us an idea of how that's impacted on what you want to do at local neighbourhood levels? So thanks once again for your presentation, and thanks for allowing me to put my questions to you. Thank you.
No worries, thanks, Clive. You actually summarised a load of it really well, so I'm very grateful for that. Okay, ASB and COVID. So just to be really clear, last couple of years, as you know, the constabulary had a report where we weren't recording crime in the way that we should do, and we've made great efforts to improve that. So you'll be unsurprised to know we were making sure that we record COVID in the right way. It's not recorded as a crime unless a crime occurs and there's an element of COVID within it. But every COVID incident reported to us is recorded as an antisocial behaviour incident. So when we're searching antisocial behaviour, it contains all of the COVID demand within it. So if I look as a total, in terms of the category of ASB, it's up by 32% on 2019. However, 35% of it is COVID-related incidents. So traditional ASB is down, as it has been year on year for many, many years, by a few percentage. But actually, in that big category, COVID takes up 35% of that. So I'll equate that to the wider bit of demand within it. So if we take wider demand, traditional ASB is down and continues to reduce. But actually, in terms of COVID and demand on the force, it's about 9% of our overall demand in terms of what we deal with on a daily basis. So I realise I've thrown a few figures out there, but I'm hoping, Clive, does that make some sense?
Yeah. I mean, and I think we need to sort of emphasise the fact that I'll put my camera on off if you want to see me. I think we need to emphasise the fact that, you know, you may be saying that, you know, ASB is going down. We need to be sure that's the message we get out there.
Yeah.
Okay, there might be you know, obviously saying due to COVID there is an increase in there, and if that's taking up, you know, all those cases are taking up 9% of the force's time in some respects, that is a massive chunk within it all, and you know, I think these facts need to be got out there. And I'm pleased that I know about it, because I can relay that out now as if you like, an ambassador or whatever you want to call me, you know, to ensure that people realise that we are here working together as a partnership, because that's the only way we're going to do it. And I can spread that message out there probably equally as well, if not better than in some cases than you can. So yeah, you've answered it for me. Thank you for that. And you know, thanks very much for the time you've afforded me this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, Chair, that's a really good message, and sorry, I will leave that one, because that's a really good point that Councillor Mosby made. Thank you.
Thank you, Adil. Okay, we have got quite a long list of questions, or people that want to ask questions, not surprisingly. Councillor Johnford next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rachel, and everyone else who's made a contribution and given presentations. A lot of what I was going to ask has been answered. I was basically going to ask the same question as Jed, probably in a different way. What sort of power have neighbourhood investigation officers got? You've answered that, but just to say, I do welcome them. I welcome the increase in the investigation officers. I represent, you know, a large area in Ilkeston South, which suffers quite a lot from ASB. That's the number one crime. You know, it is down to the lowest level. There are other serious crimes now from time to time, but you know, ASB sort of never goes away. So you know, if these people are going to investigate and help to ameliorate that, that's absolutely fine. I was just going to touch as well on the 101. So with the £15, are we saying that we are going to make improvements to the 101 service, because it's been one of the biggest bone of contentions in terms of the public, you know, for years and years. Yeah, you can go other ways as well, but the majority of public just want to pick a phone up, you know, say, look, so and so's happening outside, or it's happened, it's happening again, or whatever, you know. And I mean, I've phoned 101, and you're on ages. I've don't know if it's still there. I try to avoid it. I just go online, but I try to avoid it now because I know I'm going to be on far too long, and I don't know whether you can still leave messages. I've done that, but that takes an age to get back to you as well. So please, you know, if we do go for the full £15, please let's do something substantial with the 101 service, because it is much needed. Thank you.
Yeah, John, I echo that. As I said before, I think 101 can be where the majority of public contact is with us, and it is not at. There are many times where it falls below the level of service that I would like to give, and certainly I know that the force would like to give. And this isn't to say that those people in the control room aren't working hard, because they are working very hard in a difficult environment sometimes. But we've fallen behind in terms of the technology in there. I mean, you've touched on the online, which is a good route in, but things like callbacks and that sort of thing, we could get much smarter on. So it's not waiting for the precept. Let me just sort of give you that reassurance. We've already started the work under ACC Michelle Shooter. She's even, you know, she's had lots of high-level meetings with our supplier who supplied our IT to try to make sure we've got reliable technology that's fit for now and not fit for yesterday, so that it's in a manner in which people are used to ringing call centres and used to responding and used to doing things online. And also then reviewing in terms of the resources that we've got in there, because I do want to make that service better and it isn't what it should be.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on, Councillor Faye Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just a couple of comments. Amber Valley and our Community Safety Partnership have as a priority the enhancement of CCTV to deter, detect and reassure communities. So I really welcome investment in CCTV, as you've identified, to tackle antisocial behaviour and community crime. So that's the first comment. Secondly, I'm pleased to see funding of domestic abuse services identified, in particular the implementation of a domestic abuse perpetrator programme. I think it's an important partnership initiative to hold perpetrators to account, breaking the cycle of violence and safeguarding families. It's way overdue that rather than victims being asked why don't they leave, perpetrators are asked why don't they stop. It's a way to affect real change for individuals and society. And I just have one question about that, whether I presume it's going to be delivered across the county and referrals via MARAC, but will it be a localised delivery to ensure that there's good take-up? Thanks.
Thank you. Gosh. I mean, a couple of things on that. Domestic abuse is a big demand for us, sadly. And as I said earlier, it's not one you can just simply patrol out. People should feel safe in their homes, and they don't. And I'm very fortunate that Hardle has supported the finances of that programme, because you're right, there's things we can do to support victims, and the Commissioner has, the services under victim support underneath him to do that. But actually, sometimes it's around repeat offending and dealing with the perpetrators. And I'm grateful that the PCC has supported that programme financially with the force. In terms of its delivery, it'll be across the county. That much I do know. If it's local, I don't know any detail behind it unless you do, Commissioner, in terms of how.
Yeah, I think the detail phase is still being worked out. We've given commitment that both the Chief Constable and myself, will fund the drive program with perpetrators. The details working. I would expect it to be locally delivered, but it is county wide, so it'll be the logistics of whether you have one or two programs in the different parts of the county, or you centralize them. That's something that I think the operational leads on this will work out in the near future. But we've committed the funding, we've given support, and not only that, in terms of domestic abuse support services, which I know you're well versed in, we're making sure that we're securing more funding from the Ministry of Justice to impact on victim support services for domestic abuse victims as well.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Faye. And Andrew's just put a message in the chat bar to say he could ask the head of commissioning to produce a short briefing note if members would like that. So I think, yes, we would. Thank you very much. OK, Stephen Hansley next.
Thank you, Chair. It is Stephen Hansley and not Ian McCardle. I'd like to echo the sentiments of my colleagues and thank you both for the presentations today and the hard work you're both doing, and Hardle, your team. I have two questions, the first for Hardle and the second for Rachel, if I may. Hardle, I wondered, in terms of 1.14 in your report about the additional posts within the commissioning team and how that can be justified, given that we've talked a lot about efficiencies and savings, and moreover, could that not be, and £27,000 is a lot of money, could that not be that role be filled by a graduate, for example, or maybe work experience from somebody leaving college or so on? So that's my first question. So I guess, how can that be justified? You're on mute.
Thanks, Steve. I had to get it done once, didn't I? You're on mute. How often do we get that sold to us all? Thanks for that question, Steve. It's about the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and what I'm going to ask is Andrew Dale to give you the detail, because it's about he leads on commissioning victim support services, and that particular post is actually not about the policing element. It's about the end crime, because police and crime commissioners, as you know quite well, that we've got the role of making sure operational policing, funding and delivery is done effectively. But in the crime element, I'm also responsible for funding from the Ministry of Justice and actually commissioning victim support services, domestic abuse, sexual abuse, hate crime, restorative justice, young people support service called Got Your Back. So what I'm going to do is ask Andrew to give you the rationale as to for that particular spend.
Okay.
Andrew Dale.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Right, so I guess break this down into a few bits. I mean, the first thing to point out for those who haven't spotted it is there's a paragraph in the report at 1.14 which talks about the post and the rationale for that. The post has been recruited in the establishment at my request. It was me that approached the Commissioner and I asked that he consider giving me an extra post in my commissioning team. And the reason for that is twofold. One is that the demands from the Ministry of Justice increase annually and sometimes more than every year. And what that means is that they keep asking more of us in terms of reporting, more out of us in terms of data submissions into the centre, because as you might imagine, the commissioning of victim services within the PCC arena is still a relatively immature business model. And so what we're actually doing is continually learning. The Ministry of Justice are continually learning, and they're also responding to the relative kind of decision making around ministers as well. So there is that centre demand, which increases the demands on the team. And it's worth me saying that before this post goes in, there are only 3 of them in the team. So just to give people a sense of perspective, it is actually a very small team. The second aspect as to why I approached the Commissioner for an additional post was because what we seek to do, and this is very much something I believe in, we look to do as much as we can in partnership. So there'll be colleagues in the meeting and elsewhere that will be aware that we're looking to work as much as we can with the city and the county council and also the districts in commissioning services that are right for people in Derbyshire. And as a result, that has placed quite a lot of burden on the head of commissioning and also her deputy. When I've then got a lot of the administrative and support functions thrown into the mix, it makes it very difficult for them to manage the workload. So what I sought to do is create a post which gave both a sort of a support role and also an administrative function that could take a little bit of the load away from the 2 specialists that I've got within the commissioning team to allow them to work with external partners and also work with the Ministry of Justice as we develop our commission services portfolio. To answer your question directly about why we couldn't have gone for a graduate or some other kind of employee, what we've done is we've done what we do when we recruit any post. We've put a job description together, we've benchmarked that against an appropriate job within the organisation, and it's come out at a particular grade. So just to reassure you, what we're paying the post is commensurate with the role and is commensurate and comparable with other roles of its type. So whilst I recognise the point of we could have taken someone in to do it, I do think it's fair that we pay somebody an appropriate salary for what we're asking them to do. And so as a result, that's the salary cost that we've got. It is a relatively low grade job. I think it's fair to say. I'm certainly not recruiting a senior member of staff there. It's somebody that will help us carry the workload as we go through the next few years.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And my question to Rachel, if I may. You've talked, Rachel, about the pressures on the force in terms of the COVID restrictions and so on, enforcing those. I wondered, I'm being told by several neighbours of mine whereby people have been issued with a fine, but then they're not being made to pay those fines. How is that being enforced?
Yeah, there was a lot of issue very early on in terms of payment and following that up through the courts, etc. You're right at the start in terms of last March, which I find it really odd to be talking about last March, but last March certainly we're in that position. But the constabulary's very much making sure that we're supporting the criminal justice service, because it doesn't all sit within policing. As you know, we issue it and it goes through the process to make sure that those are followed up and that people are paying the fine, because otherwise it's toothless, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So we support our partners to do that, because otherwise it's no deterrent at all if people think, well, I'm never going to get it. But definitely a year ago there was some teething problems with that, but that has improved significantly.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much, Rachel. And thanks, Ardal and Andrew, for your responses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Gary Purdy next. Gary, are you? Yeah. Okay, great. I think you're on silent though, Gary. Can you unmute yourself? No, you're still on mute, I'm afraid.
Do it slowly, Gary, because sometimes it takes time to change.
No worries, Gary. We'll come back to you in a minute. I'll go on to Councillor Jonathan Smale and I'll come back to you, Gary.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the presentation, Rachel, and to the officers of the PCC. Very interesting and thorough insight, and commendable for what a strange year it has been for everyone in local government and our emergency services. So I've got to commend you all for that. But I just want to pick up on a few things relating to the budget, if that's all right, please. On Annex B on page 60. That's a 71 for the Office of PCC. PCC. It'd be remiss of us as members of the panel not to scrutinise some of the expenditure in relation to the office. But there was just some clarity, some points I would like to have clarification on. So second to the bottom item, 4890, it says miscellaneous expenditure, and it's quoted at £25,000 for the financial year we're in now, and obviously proposed for £25,000 next year. I was just wondering if there's any backdrop to what that miscellaneous expenditure is, sundry expenses. I understand that, all of those have to be covered, but some detail on that would be great. And then in relation to some of the items such as rail travel, other mileage, hire of vehicles. So if we're moving up to the top half of it, obviously we have had COVID, and obviously there was, a strong message from the government that we must work from home and obviously avoid travel at all costs. So have we really used that amount of money for those kind of things? I understand that the money could have been proportioned elsewhere and used for, I don't know, for such as IT services for staff to work home from. So which is obviously in the remit, which we need to do to make sure the staff are well equipped. But have we really expended that kind of money in the last year for rail travel and other mileage? They're my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. We need to watch the pennies so that we can make the pounds make an impact. I'm going to ask quite detailed questions on that paper. Can I ask the Finance Director Andrew Dale to give some response to that, please?
Yep, no problem. So I'll take those questions in order then. In terms of the miscellaneous expenditure line, it's a name of a code sitting in the finance system. What in reality it is, it's a day-to-day contingency sum that I hold in the budget so that I can respond to the changing pressures that come into the office. So that is a contingency item. Some years I'll use it in full and I'll go beyond that. Other years I won't. What that allows me to do is just manage the amount that I draw from reserves. So it's all about really just balancing the budget and keeping within the confines of good financial management. The second part of your question there around travel, no, absolutely, we've not spent that kind of amount in the year. We've behaved in exactly the way you would expect us to do, that we're not travelling around the country, and wherever possible we are working from home. What I've done is sort of create a budget which is a sort of steady state budget, if you like. We don't really know what to expect in the current year, the forthcoming year. So rather than try to second guess it, I've left the budget as is. But just to reassure you, what happens in reality is wherever I'm underspending around certain lines, it will be offset by additional investment elsewhere. You heard me talk a little earlier on about partnership working, for example, just to give you an example. If, and this does happen regularly, we get initiatives come forward that RDL may be minded to support, then I'm often looking for funds to be able to make those happen, because they are generally kind of one-off items that haven't been pre-budgeted for. So I will use underspends elsewhere in the budget to reduce the sort of call on the reserves, because obviously, central to what I seek to do is minimise the impact on the force as well. So what I look to do is not overspend within the OPCC, because clearly that has an impact on the resources Rachel has available to her. So yeah, you're right to point that out. I don't expect to spend it all next year, but the money will be used in the round on other initiatives.
Andrew, Chair, if I can go back to you.
Okay, thanks. If Gary, do you want to try one more time, see if you're able to access? If not, you've put the question in the chat and I'll ask it on your behalf if you're not able to. No, you're not able to. Okay. So on behalf of Gary Purdy, then the question is, well, first of all, he wanted to thank the Chief Constable and the team and ask 2 questions. Out of 100 crimes reported to Derbyshire Police, how many victims of crime will be told that the police will not be attending or indeed not dealing with it at all? And 2, will a debrief wash up take place once the pandemic is finally over in order to learn lessons from the experience? So that's 2 questions from Gary.
Okay, I'll start with the latter first. So we're not waiting till the end of this, because it's obviously gone on much longer than we ever thought to learn the lessons. We've actually been keeping learning the lessons log all the way through and looking at the things that we might do as business as usual. So Andrew quite timely talked about reduced travel. You know, we'd got into the habit of, if I was having a meeting, everybody would travel to headquarters. You know, so it's inefficient in terms of travel time, and it's inefficient in terms of, you know, this mileage, which we've just been talking about in terms of mileage and petrol, etc. So, you know, because we've invested in the IT, we actually can do Teams meetings where some people could come to the centre if they're nearby or work there, or other people. So Hayley could stay at Chesterfield and not bother to travel, you know, into headquarters, or Dave wrestle through the city to come to my meetings. So it's simple things like that we're doing, and we've done, you know, loads of things where we've been able to do much more learning online, which is a much more efficient way of doing it. And actually, I've also found that some of our units' productivity and performance has improved since people, you know, have been working from home. So there's definitely around a blended working environment going forward. So we're making sure we capture those as we go along. Operationally, we do debrief it quite often to learn the lessons and make sure we put them in place moving forward. So that's an ongoing it's an ongoing issue that we're already doing and we will continue to do. In terms of the first one, off the top of my head, I don't know. I think I get what you're saying in terms of what we don't have a policy to say we're not attending things, if that's what you're talking about. We don't have a policy to say no, we've got a certain amount of crime that we're not dealing with. Everything that comes in, we review in terms of threat and risk, or thrive, which includes the vulnerability, and we determine the level of response to it. So for some people, it's simply advice on the phone. For some people, it's an officer's attending straight away. For some people, it's a follow-up visit with a PCSO. There isn't a policy that says for this, you're not doing that, or for this, you're not doing that. We have to take everything as an individual, take them and there's vulnerability around it, and consider what it is, and then consider the most appropriate response. But I wouldn't offer, you know, I would have to do some work to say, well, what does that equate to with 100 crimes, I'm afraid, because it's not a way I would look at it. What I tend to look at is whether or not they have assessed in the right way in terms of according to the Thrive methodology, and whether people have articulated that.
I think that's, you're muted now, Rachel. I think that's, I've seen hands up from Gary. I think so. Chair, back to you.
Are you okay? Are you okay with that, Gary? That's fine. Okay, brilliant. In that case, moving on to Councillor Becky Woods.
Morning, thank you, Chair. Can anybody hear me? Because apparently I'm having really big right, thank you. Good nodding. Thank you to everybody for your reports, and I'd like to say I really welcome the news of the hub being put into the High Peak. The increase of visibility, which I'm sure both Alan and George, who are on this meeting, will also agree with me, because it is something we've needed in the High Peak for a while. Just a quick question on that. When do you think it will be operational, please? And I've got a second question. So do you want me to do my second one and then you can answer both? Okay. The second one is, you mentioned social media. Now, I've noticed an increased presence from my local SNT on Facebook. And it's really good because it's letting the local community know what they're doing, when they're doing it. And it's reassuring and informative as well. And it's actually made a bit of a social media star out of one of the local PCSOs, which I'm not sure he's that keen on. Is this something you're going to build on in going forward? Thank you.
Yes, so I'm ever mindful that many people, live more of their lives online, and particularly where we are at the moment, people are doing so. But actually, quite rightly, where you say High Peak, it's a massive geographical area. So to see a police officer is a more rare occurrence, simply through the geography alone or police staff. But on social media, we can absolutely engage with people, and we can tell them what we're doing, and we can listen to what they're doing, and we can come back. So that's actually a big drive within Op Derbyshire. So that, and I'm really pleased that you say that, because obviously the PCSO may not be pleased, but I'm really pleased because, quite clearly they're doing what I've asked them to do, which is to go out, to engage with people, to listen to people, and then tell them what they're doing with it. And I think, that is another level of reassurance that we can give, over and above visible presence. It's actually a visible presence online. So it's absolutely something that I've been asking them to do and will continue to do.
It states it's the timeline for the northeast hub, northwest hub.
Yeah, could I ask either Andrew or Simon to answer that for me? Simon's put his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Becky. Just to give you an update, we're in discussions with negotiations with the landowners at the moment. So we've got a preferred site. We're taking a report to the PCC in the next month to hopefully agree that sale. But the sale negotiations are continuing. It is a bit of a protracted process because of some of the uncertainties at the moment with developers particularly. But we will be taking a paper forward to the Strategic Priorities Assurance Board for the PCC shortly. We'll set out that detail.
Excellent. Thank you, Becky. Councillor Rob Mee now.
Right, excellent presentation this morning. Thank you to all involved. My question is about the consultation process, and I appreciate that this year has been particularly difficult because of COVID. But can I ask if the responses can be broken down by the demographics of the respondents at all, other than just geography of where they're from? I can afford and fully support a £15 increase in the precept, but my concern, my worry, is that the people like me who can afford it are the people who are actually far more likely to have responded to the consultation in the first place.
I think that, can I maybe ask Andrew to respond to that? I mean, I agree with you.
Sure.
Robert, I agree with you because, we've been trying to make sure that we try to get feedback. And as you can imagine, this has been harder with the COVID lockdown. Because in normal times, I would go out in different neighborhoods and different parts of the county physically and encourage people online as well and get those feedbacks. And we always try to make sure that the demographics in terms of age, the diversity of our population, we try to capture as well as we can. But as you can imagine, that would have been more challenging or more difficult in this COVID-19 lockdown period. But I think we did try to do that as it was to the best of our ability. But in your question and your comment, it's quite clear that it's going to be more difficult in this COVID lockdown situation. We always try to get as wide a perspective as possible and encourage people from all ages and backgrounds to actually complete the survey forms to inform my decision making. Andrew, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's worth noting that, as I said during the presentation, that we've had to do this in an unusual way this year because we're used to doing a lot of face-to-face events, which allow us to communicate much better and answer questions directly that people may have before they then answer the survey. So it's a little unusual, but what we did do is have 2 virtual events in January, and what we do with the social media and the other sort of communication tools is we use boosting, where for a relatively small amount of money, actually, we're able to push, and you may see on your timeline it says promoted on some of your posts, and what that allows us to do is to push it out onto as many people's timelines as possible, because we're conscious that if we're not careful, what you get is an echo chamber of you only get responses from the people that you normally get responses from. And what we want to do is hear what everybody's got to say as much as possible. So I'm just looking at some of the demographic data now, and I think I said in the presentation it was quite well split across all of the local authority areas, but I'm also looking at the gender split. A little heavily weighted towards men rather than women, if I'm honest. I would have hoped to have seen more of a 50-50 there, but it is probably more of a 60-40 type of split. We also have age profile mapped out as well. And what's quite heartening there is that we go from under 25 as a bracket to over 60, and then we have a couple of brackets in between. And the support for the £15 or more than £15 is fairly evenly spread amongst the age brackets. So there is no one bracket that stands out to me as being particularly for or against. It's quite well spread. We have also can see where the people have actually come from in terms of where they saw the consultation. The majority of people come from the Derbyshire Alert platform, which if your colleagues will be aware of, it's quite a useful tool for us to push things out to people. But also there was a good third of the respondents that came from social media channels. So yeah, we've got some of the demographic data. It suggests to me that it's a good overall spread, so I don't have any major concerns that we're missing out on a target audience as such.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Jed's come back asking for another question. I assume we'll let him have one more question, and then I think that'll probably wrap up in terms of questions that we've got for you today. Jed?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my next questions are to the financial gurus, Simon and Andrew. I think it must be recognised that the precept, any increase in the precept, builds into the funding base. So my question is, what is the Derbyshire Constabulary ratio regarding funding base in relation to the other East Midland policing areas? And another question, nationally, police areas have an average of 9% reserves. Derbyshire's is 5.5%. So what are the short and mid-term risks, and how will the reserves be built up to be the national average? Thank you.
Andrew, do you want me to start, and then do you want to chip in with any?
Yeah, if you
else?
can,
Okay.
Simon, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jed. Just to take the final one, the latter one first, in terms of the percentage reserves. Yeah, it is fair to say we are at the lower end of the reserves, as highlighted in the report, and we are very mindful of that. What we do in our reserve strategy is model all different scenarios to show what the impact would be of certain increases in costs, unexpected costs in year, to make sure that our general fund balance, which is the 5.5 million that I referred to, is appropriate. But the reality is, if we did have any particular in-year costs, then we would have to look at how we the programmes we've got around the estate, around IS, and some of the things that you've heard us talk about today, to make sure that we could have fund those, and actually it may well deliver some delay in some of those projects. But we've got some flexibility. We have got some flexibility or reserves around the uncertainty around the council tax income as well for this year. But yeah, certainly beyond, in 12 months' time, it will be a challenge again to make sure that we've got reserves that are appropriate for the risks that we're facing. And in terms of the other one around the funding split, I think certainly traditionally we've probably not benefited in the way that maybe some of the perhaps southern forces have benefited with the funding settlements. So we do traditionally, if you look at the funding formula, maybe not get the share that others get, which again is perhaps not too different to what you'll experience in local authorities. That's improved somewhat with, let's say, the split in terms of the precept and the revenue grant, but we are still pushing and aware that the funding formula perhaps doesn't reflect some of the needs that we have in Derbyshire, particularly around morality, which again is no different to what you'll see in local authorities as well. So we do continue to lobby on that, and we're interested in the consultation that hopefully will be back on the table soon around that funding formula.
Yeah, just to add to that, Jed, the funding formula, we're still using a funding formula which was settled about 15 years ago, and we still haven't reached the amount that was allocated to Derbyshire Constabulary in that funding formula. And any funding formula going ahead will have the same problem. When we recalculate the funding formula, there are winners and losers because the general overall pot does not change. And when that happens, and the way it happened last time, the bigger net areas were net losers, and forces like ourselves, which are sort of neither urban nor rural, we're sort of a mixture of the two, we were gainers. And I think a couple of years ago, we were still £7 million short of what the last funding formula allocated to Derbyshire, because the dampening effect was still being applied now, some 15 years later. And the same thing when 2 years ago, there was an attempt made by the government to have a new funding formula that was giving us a gain of something, anything between £7 and £20 million for Derbyshire in this new formula. But then it got challenged by one of the forces, and that was stopped and shelved at that time by the government. And I'm hoping that they will be able to come back with a new funding formula review. And again, that has been deferred because of COVID-19 from this year to hopefully next year, but we don't know when the funding formula will be looked at because we are negatively impacted on that general funding formula.
Okay, thank you, Hardle. Thank you, Simon. Simon, could I just come back with a quick one to you? Did Derbyshire Constabulary take the offer of the free fuel from BP during the emergency?
We did, Jed, yes, and we've been offered that again only last week. So that offer's come back on the table for this week as well. So, and same for the fire service as well.
So that'll be 124,000 combined.
It certainly, we saw around 60,000 in the first offer that was made. Yeah, so around about that, I think, from memory.
So is that shown in the accounts at all?
You'll see that in the monitoring that will go to the Strategic Priorities Assurance Board. So obviously we'll look at that again, like Andrew said, in terms of travel for this coming year.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Ardle.
I think Andrew also wanted to make a few comments as well at this point, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just to pick up your questions there, Jen, in terms of reserves and then the precept to grant ratio. In terms of reserves, obviously I've been around a few years now, and it was with a slightly wry smile that you asked the question, because obviously we were criticised for having too high reserves a number of years ago. So there has been a managed use of reserves, as Simon talked about there. It's worth stressing that it's my responsibility on Hardle's behalf to ensure that the reserves are appropriate, and there is a statement to that effect within the budget report. I think it's fair to say, and this is a message that I've given the force, is that I feel we've reached about the level below which I don't want to see us drop. So there is going to be quite a lot of work for the constabulary over the coming years to make sure that they can exist within their means, because there is not that infinite supply of reserves to cushion the blow. So that really was inherent in the point I was making earlier, that the £15 precept increase is required, because without it, deficits in year 2 in the medium-term financial plan through to year 4 get deeper. And at that point, we are facing some really difficult decisions if we don't go with this precept increase. So I guess what I would say in sort of very straightforward terms is the precept increase this year helps us keep our head above water. It gives us the time to be able to have a look at what we're spending in terms of policing and crime and get within our means. And we've got a balanced budget for next year, but in the medium term, it's certainly challenging. And then just to pick up the precept to grant ratio point, I don't have the exact figures to hand, but my recollection is that we're broadly in the pack in terms of the region. The biggest contrast between our position and others is to be seen with some of the southern forces, where they are heavily precept geared and have much less reliance on central grants. And what that manifested itself into during the austerity period was that when police grant was being cut from the centre, because it was such a small percentage of their overall funding base, they were actually ironically able to preserve, if not increase, their police officer numbers, whilst many forces across the country were cutting. So I think the point that we just seek to make is that a precept increase year on year gets us stepping in the right direction to becoming locally resilient in terms of our funding base. notwithstanding political views locally. Obviously, that will always play a part. But if we're able to gear more of our funding towards the local tax as opposed to the central grants, it means we're less vulnerable, if you like, to central government policy. And from a finance professional point of view, that's a good place to be. Politically, you all may have different views on that subject.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. That's really helpful. I'm sorry, there is one more question. Councillor Mo Potter's struggling with her internet access at the moment, so if I can ask a question on her behalf, it's in the chat bar, but it's about agile working and staff working from home, and moving forward, whether or not they may actually prefer to do so, and has any consideration been given to employees to continue to work from home when we're looking at premises requirements moving forward. So I think that's
Yeah, thank you for that. So a piece of work that we do have ongoing is we call it mobile workplace, because it sort of refers to where you work, how you work, and actually the hours that you work as well. Because as I said, I think for one of my answers, some of our units have found that actually productivity and performance has gone up in the working from home, and actually many people are saying, well, actually I'd quite like a blended approach, really. So when we talked about learning the lessons and picking up what we would like to do as business as usual, so that piece of work is ongoing. What we're doing is some roles cannot work from home. So response officers, safe and neighbourhood teams, those frontline people cannot work from home. So we're talking primarily the people who are not frontline. So we're doing a piece of work where we assess, could somebody work from home all the time? Could they work part of the time? Do they need to be in the office? Because sometimes IT and the CREST team that do road safety are a good example where the IT can't be at home, at least it's one that's in the office. So we assess those against those criteria, and then it's working with the people to see what do they want to do, so that we come up to a position where we know what the state requirements are. So they have been taken into account in terms of moving forward, but the building of the new premises that we've talked about on the northeast and northwest are absolutely based firmly within the response policing environment, not within some of the support functions that I'm talking about. But actually the piece of work I'm talking about more is we were really creaking at headquarters in terms of fitting everybody in, but with this new ethos of actually, well, I might want to work some days from home, and I might want to do some days in the office, so you don't have a dedicated workspace. It means that we can fit more people into the headquarters complex, because not everybody's there all the time. And it also means that some of the money we were going to have to spend on some of the bits of headquarters that haven't been redeveloped, we're now no longer going to need to do, because we can move them into the new build. So it's saving some money and saving some future investment. So yes, all of that has been joined up to make sure that we get the estate requirements right, and we don't spend money where we absolutely don't need to.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Rachel. I assume if Mo wants to come back, she will, but I think that was quite a comprehensive answer on that. I think you can quite clearly see from the range and depth of questions that we've presented to you today that the panel's given very careful consideration to not only the reports that you've provided to us to read in advance, but also the information that we've actually had presented to us today. So therefore, I think we have reached a point now where we would need to take a vote on this. I need to obviously remind the panel of what our options are in this case in terms of the precept. So we can, in this case, support the precept recommendations without qualification or comment. We can support it, but with some recommendations, or we could veto the proposed precept, but we would need a majority of at least 2/3 of the membership of the panel in order to do that. So on that basis, what I was going to do is ask for a proposal from the panel that in the first instance, are we going to accept the recommendation and support this precept budget without qualification? If I can have a proposal on that, and then Liz and Ivan are going to do a poll vote as we've done before in order to get a clear understanding on that.
Could I move that we have a vote on that recommendation, Chair?
Thank you very much, John.
I would second
Thank you.
Second, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think that was, I'm not quite sure who it was, but
That
thank
was
you
Paul.
anyway.
It was Paul.
Paul, thank you very much. Okay, so if I can hand over then to Liz and Ivan to run through the vote process for us, please.
Yes, Chair, that's no problem. We'll go through the vote process. I've picked up that there are a couple of people that can't access their mics. I think that's Councillor Potts and Councillor Purdy. So if both of you wouldn't mind, the chat box does seem to be working for you both. So if you could put your vote in the chat, that would be very much appreciated. So if we go through the roll call, because we have found that's the easiest way of doing it. So I've got Councillor Jed Potter to begin with, please.
4.
Councillor George Warmby as substitute for Councillor Carol Hart.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson.
4.
Councillor Moseby.
4.
Councillor Innes.
In favour.
Councillor Purdy. I think we've got in the chat
Yes,
box.
he's put some comments in, Liz.
4, but there's a comment. I would like to see a breakdown of figures as per Appendix B and miscellaneous. So thank you. Councillor Clare.
4.
Councillor Barrow.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Potts. I've picked up that you've put 4 in the chat box. Councillor Rind.
4.
Councillor Woods.
4.
Councillor Flood.
4.
Councillor Pegg.
4.
Councillor Smale.
4.
Councillor Niblock.
'Not at the meeting, Liz.
Not at the meeting. Right, okay. Councillor Mee.
4.
Councillor Bagshaw.
4.
Chair.
Yes, 4.
And Dr. Hansley.
4.
Thank you. That's a unanimous vote for, subject to the comment made by Councillor Purdy. So if you could let me know, Chair, if you'd like that to be added into the letter which we publish at the end.
Yes, please. That would be very helpful, Liz.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I, Chair, can I thank you and the panel for your support, and can I thank the Chief Constable and the Finance Officers for making the information available to you in a readier manner as possible. So thank you very much appreciated, and it's a good news for the people of Derbyshire.
Thank you, Hardiel. Thank you, Rachel. We appreciate the time you've given us to go through all of that today. Moving on then, there is a couple more items on the agenda, isn't there? There is comments onto that, Hardiel or anything? You're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. Second, you're on mute comment for me. The report speaks for itself, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions, and of course the Chief Constable has been leading on this work, so she'll be able to respond as well. So more than happy to receive any comments or questions on the paper.
Thank you. Can I jump in and ask a question to start with them first, please? Obviously, you've started to talk, Rachel, a little bit about lessons learned and
You're frozen, Rachel. Vicky.
Of the people of your constabulary and your staff, have you got strategies in place for that? Sorry, I don't know if you've heard me or not.
Yeah, no, you froze early on. Sorry.
Right. Okay. Shall I repeat?
Yes, please.
Obviously, in terms of the welfare of staff, it really, and what strategies you've got in place for supporting them. I mean, obviously, you mentioned in your report about the impact of increased overtime, and it's really about the health and well-being of your staff that I'm interested in.
Sure. So I'll probably split that into two parts in terms of a response, because I've really got people who are in work and people who are working from home or sort of mixed. So there's definitely two sort of sides to that. So if I just take the people who are at work, we have all the way through, we planned really early on this and really worked hard to make sure that they'd got PPE and the public health guidance as much as possible so that we could give them confidence that it's a COVID safe environment for them to work in. And, you know, as every other place within the community we do have small outbreaks. We do have a number of officers who tested positive, officers and staff over these last 12 months. And, you know, at any one time, there are a number of people isolating. So the main thing we can do with them in terms of their well-being is to make sure that the environment is safe and that we equip them in terms of it being safe in terms of dealing with what they've got to deal with, because, you know, we must remember they have to go and deal with instances where people know they have COVID and indeed on occasion use the fact that they have this COVID as a weapon against my officers and staff by threatening to spit at people, etc., something which is dreadful, and we provide a robust support for that. But then we're also really mindful that actually it does take its toll and people are getting tired. So we've been very careful to make sure that people are taking their annual leave. I realise you can't go away, but actually a break from work is really important. And then making sure that we always have, throughout the year, we have a big wellbeing strategy. And a big bit of the focus of that, you would be unsurprised to know, tends to be on people's mental health. So we have very good support in place in terms of our care provider, Health Assured, where people can ring up straight away and, you know, and talk to somebody. That links in really nicely with occupational health should they be really struggling. But then we do initiatives of work, as you would expect with any other big workplace around this week. There's a lot of initiatives happening about, you know, time to talk to people if you're really struggling. So we support all of those within the front line. And then specifically on the question set was the people working from home. And whilst it's a safer environment, some of those people are very scared to come back working in the when COVID goes to, you know, to feel safe within the working environment, and we're working through with them to make them feel safe and reassure them that it is a COVID safe environment. But also we recognise that people can be quite isolated at home. So we've done a lot of work, and I am blessed with the technology and with our teams, because many of our units have as many Teams calls as they can with people. They'll have an ongoing chat with people. And on occasion, people need to come into work to get their computer updated. So we enable that. And we have on the very odd occasion where people have really struggled at home because working from home isn't always a good environment for everyone. Enabled them to come into work and work in our buildings in a safe way where we've needed to do that to balance their needs. So it's a combination of an overarching strategy and a commitment to people's well-being, recognising the impact that it's had, recognising that there's different flavours, you know, from isolation through to I'm having to go out and deal with all of this, and try to make sure we provide a very supportive place.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That's very reassuring. Clive and then Jed.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's really on the COVID stuff in it all. Obviously, you know, there's a vaccination programme in place at present whereby the 4 groups who are amenable should all be done by middle of this month within it all. And obviously, police officers, and as we've been talking earlier in this meeting, the control room staff who are taking the messages and that are vitally important that they maintain, you know, they're still at work. So I'm just wondering, have we got a policy as regards trying to pursue the after these 4 areas have been vaccinated? Have we got a policy to pursue to try and ensure our frontline officers and anybody else, i.e. the control staff, are going to be vaccinated to give them maximum protection and also then deliver that safe and secure environment for the people of Derbyshire?
Yeah, if I, Chair, Chief Constable, if I go first and then you can add, I mean, both myself and the Chief Constable and the associations have written to the government and the Prime Minister to say after the priority groups that have been identified have been taken forward, we want to make sure that frontline workers like the police and other emergency services are vaccinated. And I think that's a really important element of making sure we protect those who are going towards danger. And I think the same, I think the Chief Constable will add the detail, but in terms of testing and making sure that those people who are working, can they be immediately tested so that they're not isolated or self-isolation and to be at home? And if they test negative, they can continue working. Those are things which the Chief Constable and I talk about constantly, and we're working and prepared for all eventualities on the vaccination front and on the testing front so that our workforce can be maintained into its full capacity. And at the same time, Chief Constable will be able to share with you in terms of how contact staff are working in 3 different sites to ensure that if there's an outbreak, the whole system doesn't fall down.
Thanks, Commissioner. Yeah, I'll cover a couple of those things. So the vaccination, we are able to access through the vaccination site. Sorry, I'll start with testing. We're able to access through the testing sites. If we think we've come into contact with somebody, we're very able to go and get, and I let the officers, do it on duty if we need to, etc. Go and get access to the testing and testing regularly if they've had contact with somebody. I appreciate that there's static sites and all the rest of it, but we make sure that that's available to them so that can provide that reassurance. It doesn't mean that we don't self-isolate, because we absolutely have to, like everybody else. And we have a number of people. I myself have had to self-isolate due to a contact at work. It is simply a fact of where we are at the moment. Vaccination, I feel very passionately about this, as does the PCC, in terms of number one, we must support the NHS strategy around the first 4 priority groups. These are the people who are with most potential of losing their lives and indeed of becoming seriously ill and needing serious help from the NHS. And therefore, it is absolutely right that they get the vaccination first, because their lives are most at risk, and our number one duty is the preservation of life. So we absolutely support that. However, myself and the PCC, with the support of the unions, the Federation, the Superintendents Association, wrote, as Hardle has said, to lobby for our position. It's not just police and policing, it's other frontline workers, so that when we've done this first 4 group, to look at who really does need to have the vaccination moving forward, who is most at risk. As I said earlier, it's become a thing where people will use COVID as a weapon against officers and will spit at them and then say, I've got COVID, that sort of thing. And we see those cases played out in the news nationally, and it happens locally as well. And I'm very committed to supporting officers and staff who have that sort of happen to them in the line of their duty. So we're very much lobbying the position in terms of saying police officers and other people in key frontline positions should be considered in terms of if there's a reprioritization of vaccination. And should that be the case, we've obviously done some work internally with our fingers crossed, hoping for the best, in terms of looked at who are those people who should have it, because quite rightly, it's not just the people going out and answering the calls. The control room is another place which is vital for policing, as is the custody suites as well. So we've obviously gone through to prioritise that, should it get to that.
Yeah, well, thank you both for that. Very, very reassuring, and glad you're on the ball with it. God bless. Thank you.
Okay, Jed.
Thank you, Chair. My question is under the criminal justice banner. About 18 months ago, I believe, the Crown Prosecution Service wanted to undertake a pilot for virtual trials for anticipated guilty pleas or minor offences. I'm just wondering, can I say I am no fan of virtual trials? I think when somebody's being tried and tested under oath, you should be able to see the whites of their eyes. So, but during the pandemic, would it not be an idea to trial virtual trials for low class offences and anticipated guilty pleas just to get through the backlog? Thank you.
Right. Shall I start, Chief Constable? That's a good point, Jed. I think all options are being considered at the moment, and the decision about whether we should do that or not is really in the hands of the judiciary. There's a whole lot of concerns raised that particularly police and crime commissioners, and nearly every police and crime commissioner is now the chair of their local criminal justice board and the criminal justice system in terms of speedy justice, which is, I think, the point that you're trying to make about how can we sort of continue to provide justice in this difficult situation. They sort of, any conversation I have with a sort of political elected role, they want to keep away from the judiciary. The judiciary are the final arbiters of how courts conduct sentencing, low level or high level. And so it is a question that's been discussed. The options have been looked at. Some things are being communicated into the court system virtually. I don't think at the moment there's been any example where the defendant, for example, has been able to, I think this is what you're suggesting for lower level types of offences, has been able to virtually communicate into the court, unless I think they're on a remand hearing or something like that. And that has been used through the video, and we've had to open up our Ripley custody suite. And in fact, with the COVID lockdown, the civil contracted organisers who were transporting and overseeing defendants were unable to do their job, and the constabulary had to step in to undertake those roles, and they had to use virtual video links into courts on occasions. But actual trials, full trials going virtual, that has not happened, to my understanding, anywhere in the country. It has been discussed, but the final decision on that is the judiciary, either the judge in the Crown Court or the clerks who advise the justice of the peace in our magistrates' courts. I don't know, Chief Constable, if you want to add anything to that.
The criminal justice backlog has been a challenge because it's a system, and the system which really struggled to adapt earlier on to the needs of COVID and working in a pandemic. So it did create a backlog, and that backlog still does cause us issue, and it bothers me because I feel that we do extra work to make sure we keep those victims and witnesses updated and confident in us and the system. But I worry that the longer it goes on, the more they'll lose their confidence in that. And I think then that ultimately could get reflected in terms of wider victims' confidence in policing. So it is something that vexes me, and the Commissioner and I talk a lot about, because obviously the Commissioner chairs the LCJB. There have been no virtual full court hearings, but we have been doing the virtual remand hearings, but that's now stopped as well. Some of the backlog, though, to reassure you, is clearing, particularly around the magistrates. The issues are more around the complex ones that are at Crown Court, is where we see more of the issues still moving forward. But it's something that is really being raised out and talked about at the highest level. Policing, the MPCC is absolutely talking to the Home Secretary about this on a really regular basis to try to improve the situation.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Hardle.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, first of all, thanks very much for the detailed report on your update on COVID and how it's impacting on you. But also, I think the panel will probably want to join me in saying we do appreciate all the hard work that you and your staff are doing in very challenging circumstances very often at this time. Quite a few people are having to leave, I'm afraid. We knew this was going to be a long meeting, but I think we must just keep ploughing on. So we've got a couple more agenda items, but I think they're probably going to be quite quick. Item 6 is the timetable of meetings for the panel for the next year, which I'm assuming, unless anybody's got any objections, we will just accept that as the programme of meetings for the panels going forward.
Happy with that.
Is that okay, Liz?
Yeah, that's fine. If I could just mention just the one in June, that obviously is a slight change to normal because they've previously been in May, but we have put it back slightly to accommodate, well, hopefully the elections. As it stands at the moment, we are anticipating they'll be going ahead. So we've postponed the May meeting slightly because we've had to cancel it in previous years. We've had no panel members, so hopefully that's agreed. And there is, of course, a meeting scheduled for the 18th of March for this year, and that was mentioned in the previous report. So there, just to flag up that we do still have one more meeting to go on last year's schedule.
Lovely, thanks, Liz. Moving on then to number 7, announcements. Can I jump in here and take the floor, if I may? And our announcement is really very welcome to the panel, and I assume it will be welcome to you in your office as well, Hardiel. We now have been able to appoint some dedicated support to the panel. So we'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Lucy Collard, who's on the call today. She is our dedicated support officer to the panel. She's already had some induction with Liz, obviously, who's been carrying that role for a while now, in addition to her other duties, and she's had an induction with myself and Jed, and I'm sure she will be in touch with David, Pete in your office, and obviously you'll get to know Lucy going forward. So that was my announcement, so sorry to hog the floor a little bit on that. I don't know if there's anything else that anybody else wants to raise under this item. Yeah, Hardiel, sure.
Yeah, okay. I was just waiting if any other panel members wanted to come in, Chair.
No, I've not got anything.
Okay. Well, that's really good news in terms of your announcement, Chair, because as I've said before, being an ex-chair of the police and crime panel many years ago, I think it's really useful that you have the right resources and individuals to help support the work that you are doing in a really, in a challenging circumstances. So I welcome your announcement and welcome our colleagues who are going to make sure that is delivered. I've got 2 announcements to make, Chair. One is to just remind panel members that I've launched the 2nd phase of my vulnerability fund, which is up to £25,000 of any community group organisation who can apply into that. And the first phase, if people have been following the media announcements, is that it was oversubscribed threefold in terms of application for funding to what I could actually give, which demonstrated the need out in our communities in the whole of Derbyshire. So I would commend all panel members to make sure that they make this available to their and known in their communities and through their networks. Secondly, you will be getting a letter from myself to your local district and community safety partnership cabinet member leads, and hopefully copy to your chief executive of the 2nd phase of the Safer Streets Fund. Now, if you recall, the first one, police and crime commissioners were able to work with local authorities to identify that and then make applications. And we were successful in getting funding, nearly £500,000 for a Safer Streets Fund target hardening, designing out crime initiative in the West End of Darley Ward in Derby City. But on this occasion, the government has encouraged local authorities to come forward with ideas as well. So can I encourage you to take this message back and work towards identifying any bids that you want to put forward in super Artford areas mostly. I think the details will come, and in your area that could benefit from the 2nd Safer Streets Fund. The final decision of those which are put forward is going to be the police and crime commissioners, myself, but I'm hoping that we can make the maximum 3 bids into the process, up to £400,000 each to £500,000 each, and then the government will decide which of those are successful. So I just would encourage you all, when you get the letters in your local authorities, please consider whether you can come forward with any ideas of bids. And of course, the constabulary will work with you in terms of crime hotspots and so on and so forth, which fall into the current criteria. On this occasion, they are looking at rural areas as much as urban areas. So please, all those districts which are more rural or significantly rural, do not think that you are excluded from this consideration. Chair, those are the two announcements I'd like to make. Thank you.
Many thanks for those. I'm sure the panel members will be really keen to take that information back into their local districts. Becky's actually commented on the chat to say that she's already made her local community groups aware of the fund, so that's great news. Okay, so I think that probably takes us to the final agenda item then, which is date of next meeting, which is the 18th of March this year, as Liz has already mentioned. I'd just probably like to just close the meeting, if I may, by saying thank you again to the Commissioner and to the Chief Constable and your team for spending time with us this morning. I think it's been a really successful meeting. We've got a comment in the chat from Councillor Paul Pegg, who's had to leave, and he's actually saying it's one of the best meetings he's attended in all his time on the Police and Crime Panel. So on that very positive note, I'd like to say thank you all for your participation. Thank you to the panel members for all of their comments and their questions and challenges. If everybody stays safe, and we'll see you all again in March. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
Chair.
very much.
Thank you, panel members.